Let's create our first Workato recipe. And let's say that we're moving leads from Gmail into Google Sheets. We're getting their email addresses, and we'll put them inside a spreadsheet that we call demo-blog leads. You can call it whatever you want. Just make sure that when you're creating one, you have at least 2 rows. The first row should contain your headers, things like email and date, and the second row should contain an example of that information. And now we can move over to Workato. Okay, let's click the Create New Recipe button, and that'll bring you to Workato's interface. And there are basically 2 parts to a recipe. The first is the trigger, and the second is the actions. So the difference is that the trigger tells us when the recipe is going to be run. So we know that we want to start with Gmail, and every time the Gmail has, say, a new email, we want the recipe to run. Now we also need to connect, so we're going to click the orange connect link, and that's going to bring us into Workato's connections. And just follow the instructions. This will be pretty straightforward. Perfect, now we're connected. And now I'm going to choose a label. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I'm just going to choose a label that comes default with Gmail. Now we'll move on to the actions. These are things that we want to execute every single time that the recipe runs. So we're going to choose Google Sheets because we know that we want to send in the information from Gmail into Google Sheets. And we'll click Add a New Row. Okay. Now let's click the Connect button again, and we'll connect to Google Sheets. Select one of the connections, click Connect, and again, this is something that I have existing, but you'll create a new one, and it'll be pretty quick. Now, we have to choose a spreadsheet. Remember that ours was called demo-blog leads, and we choose the only sheet that's available, actually. And Workato automatically populates this with all the fields that are available. So you can either click on one of them at a time to enable them, or click Select All. Once you're done that, click out of the box, and Workato adds it in for you. Now we need to fill this with a new row of information. So where do we get that from? Where do we get the email and the date? Well, that comes from the email that triggered the recipe, right? And all this information is available on the right side of your screen. Okay, so we're going to choose something from here. Let's say the from address. We'll click that and that'll show up. Let's click into the date box and fill that in with, let's say, the receive time. And this time I'm actually going to drag and drop that in. So you can either click or drag and drop, both work. And now that we're done this, let's move on to the connections. That's all done. Perfect. Let's fill in the description with something that's relevant, like Gmail to Google Sheets, and you can fill this in as you wish. We'll click Finish, and now we're up to the recipe. Now we need to test this out, so let's click Test Recipe. When you click Test Recipe, it's going to run the entire recipe once, from the trigger all the way through the actions, and it's going to show up as a new row inside what we call the job report. And now that it's shown up, you can see inside of Google Sheets that everything's been filled in automatically. You'll also notice that there are a few shortcomings. For example, the date isn't formatted exactly as we would expect. And what if we have duplicate email addresses? This is something that we're not accounting for yet. All these are pretty important, so we're going to be covering these in our subsequent videos.